thing that I got even more of a buzz from was the next bit. And it's about what do we do with the stuff that comes our way? What do we do with it on the inside? So NLP was developed in 1972 by a couple of people, John Grinder, Professor of Linguistics. Richard Bandler, his background was computers and systems analysis. And in systems analysis, what they're interested in, at its simplest, is what are the inputs, what are the internal processes, and what are the outputs. So Richard Bandler brought that mindset to human psychology. I do think it's interesting that NLP was developed by two people who had no background, no primary background in psychology. So it's like they brought different eyes to look at the human condition. So Bandler's take was, what are the inputs for human beings? Well, the inputs for us as human beings is sensory-based information. What we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, what we smell. Okay. Then the next question is, if those are the inputs, what are the internal processes? What do we do on the inside with the stuff that we take in? And his suggestion is that it's simplest. We have two major processes on the inside. So we have a thinking process, the stuff that goes on up here, and we have a feeling process. The stuff that goes on down here. And each of those impacts on the other. So what I think affects my feeling, and it's my feeling that affects my thinking. So there's like a cycle goes on. What I think he really brought to our understanding of psychology, I've not seen this anywhere else, is he said, if we process the world through our five senses, so through what we see, what we hear, what we feel, etc., he said the way we must process that on the inside, part of our thinking must be in sensory-based terms. So by that he means if we take in information from the world through our eyes, part of how we think on the inside is in terms of pictures. And they might not be photographic quality pictures, but we'll have like a visual representation of stuff. So if I ask you to think about a specific thing that you did yesterday, so I'm going to ask you to remember a specific thing that you did yesterday. Do you have like a picture in your mind's eye? Might not be photograph like, but you have a picture in your mind's eye. If I asked you to think about a close friend, you get a picture, you see her in your mind's eye. Might not be the same clarity as if she were here in the room, but we create pictures in our head. If I asked you to think about something that you're going to do tonight, a specific something you're going to do tonight, gosh, that made you jump up, Laura, didn't it? It's like, you see it straight away. So part of the way we think is in terms of pictures. We have internal visual images. By the same argument, part of the way we think is in terms of sound. So if I asked you to think about the friend, maybe you hear the friend's voice in your head. That thing from last night, maybe there was a soundtrack then, but maybe there were voices, maybe there was some music, noise, whatever. I think tonight, same sort of thing. And another way we do it is, as well as processing in pictures and sounds, so this is like remembered pictures, remembered sounds, imagined pictures, imagined sounds. Another thing that we do very often is we run a commentary. So we have self-talk or internal dialogue, and that's the voice in your head. And I have to say, I was a bit freaked when I learnt this, because part of my background is I've worked in mental health as a social worker, and people have voices in their head. I had schizophrenia. I have never met anybody who doesn't do self-talk. I've never met anybody who doesn't do. I even worked with some people who were profoundly deaf and had been deaf from birth, and even they did. It's like not self-talk as you and I would know it, but even they ran voices in their head like an internal commentary. And this sort of thing, some of you recognise this in yourself? Any of you do this self-talk? And sometimes we can do it in a good way, but then sometimes we can really give ourselves a hard time with it. So any of you do that if you make a mistake? The self-talk kicks off and you start giving yourself a hard time. Oh no, what will people think? Oh, I didn't do that, did I? Oh no, I didn't do that. And that can have a real bad impact, can't it? If you do a lot of that unhelpful self-talk. We'll teach you a trick tomorrow that allows you to turn that right down. Or somebody else does something that you don't like, and the voice kicks off in your head. Who do they think they are talking to me like that, cheeky buggers? Eh? Me. So we can wind ourselves up with our internal commentary on what's going on. And then at the feeling level, well, there's sort of different levels of this. So one level of feeling is what I'd call emotion. And the emotion level is generally the word we put to what we're experiencing. So I'm thinking about an interview I've got coming up. I feel anxious. So anxious is the label we put to what we're experiencing. But as well as that, that label captures a whole set of body physiology. So are you familiar with stuff about adrenaline and noradrenaline and fight and flight and all of that? So we have an internal physiology, so like internal body chemistry. So I've got an interview coming up, I feel anxious, and I've got all this adrenaline pumping around my body. And sometimes people will describe that in a sensation, so they'll use like a metaphor. They'll say, I'm feeling anxious, it's like I've got butterflies flying in my stomach. Yeah? So sometimes they'll describe a sensation. Now my experience of this over the last 15, 17 years is that very often feelings don't come from nowhere. More often than not, I'd say 95% of the time our feelings are a result of pictures, sound, self-talk that are running in our head, but they're running in a way we're not actually consciously aware of them. So my notion is it's like they're just behind my awareness is the way I describe it. But I'm actually looking at the world through those pictures and with those sounds at the back of my mind and with that self-talk. It's that drives my feelings, and it's the interplay of those that govern my behaviour. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you a bit of a daft story that illustrates this. And it's a story about how I came to be living in the Northwest. I'm going back to the early 80s. So I qualified as a social worker in late 79, early 1980. And I was working in Lincolnshire for a group of hospitals there. And I liked the job, but I had a boss who I found very, very hard work. And he's the sort of guy who gives social work a bad name, if I'm honest. And I've been there a couple of years, and I thought, I'm desperate to get away from this fella, because he really is. And the place itself wasn't brilliant. And I saw a job advertised, a promotion, at Calderstones Hospital near Whalley, senior social worker. And in those days, I didn't know any of this stuff. And I also had some very unhelpful internal sort of thought patterns around jobs and promotion and stuff like that. So I saw this job advertised in the paper, and my first thought was, oh, it'd be good to go for that. And it was partly I'd spent the second half of my childhood in Lancaster, so I like the Northwest. I like the area. Lincoln's very flat. I don't know if any of you know Lincoln very well, but very often in Lincolnshire, the highest contour point is a cabbage. You know, it's like there's nothing much to look at above the ground. So cabbage or a daffodil is the tallest thing in South Lincolnshire very often. So I thought it'd be nice to go back to the Northwest, and my mum were knocking on a bit. She lived in Lancaster. She was needing more attention than we could easily give from Lincoln. But the minute I saw the job advertised, some of that self-talk stuff kicked off in my head. And it was, who are you to go for a job like this? You've only been qualified 2 years. They'll think you've got ideas above your station. That was the thing that went through my head. I don't know if any of you do that. If you saw a job you really fancied, and any of you good at talking yourselves out of it? Yeah? So I was very good. So I was doing all that, who are you to go for a job like this? They'll think you've got ideas above your station, blah, 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 blah. Well, I managed to get over that. I rang up for an application form, got it, filled it in, all the time thinking, there's no way they're going to give me an interview. Who am I to go for a job like that? I've only been qualified 2 years. They'll think I've got ideas above my station. Sent it off, and then about 2 weeks later, I get a letter in the post inviting me to interview. And the minute I opened the letter, without knowing it, I started to create pictures in my mind's eye of what the interview panel would be like and what the interview would be like. So I started to imagine it without being consciously aware of it. The interview panel were 4 of the sternest old men that you could ever wish to meet. So 4 very, very stern old men. And what I imagined, without knowing it, was they were going to ask me the hardest question that any human being could ask another one at an interview, and my only possible response was my version of a goldfish impression. So they were going to ask me this question, and I'd go like that. So, you know, I'm already feeling anxious about this damned interview, and it's still 2 weeks off. I do the stuff you have to do. I think do a bit of a presentation, stuff like that. I do a bit of research and all of that. And as the day of the interview gets close, I start thinking, how am I going to get there? Because the interview was 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning in Burnley. You can't actually get from Lincoln to Burnley by 11 o'clock in the morning. So I had to think, how am I going to get there? And I thought, well, I could go on public transport and go the night before and stop in a hotel. But the last interview that I did that at, I got drunk the night before. So alone in a strange town, and I got proper pissed. So I didn't perform particularly well at the interview because of that. You know, you don't do with hangover. So I thought, I'm going to learn from that experience. I thought, I'll just get up early and drive over. And the interview was at 11 o'clock in the morning. And one of the things we'll do later on in the course is there's stuff about how we do time. So there are some people, for me, to be somewhere comfortably for an 11 o'clock start, to be on time for that, I would need to be there probably 20 past 10 at the very, very latest. You know, so some people do, it's like if you're to be somewhere for a particular time, they build in a big sort of margin for error. If I was there at 5 to 11, I'd feel like I was late. If I was there at 11, I'd feel like I was really, really, really late. And if I was there at 1 minute past 11, I'd think I was the worst human being in the world. So that's the way I do time. Other people can turn up half an hour late and not blink. But not me, I can't do that. Or I don't do that. So I was thinking, I need to get there for 20 past 10. If I leave Lincoln at 6 in the morning, it's got to be enough time from 6. It's like nearly 4.5 hours to drive across the country. It's got to be plenty of time. So I get up early, I set off driving, and the traffic were horrendous. And as I get closer and closer to Burnley, I realise that in my head I'm going to be late. And I don't know, those of you who might know the geography over here, I'd got to Todmorden. It was 20 to 11, and I'd just pulled into Todmorden. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late. So I start upgrading the pictures in my head. So now these 4 old men, stern old men, are all looking at their watches. I'm going, like that. And I'm going, and how are they going to give you a job as a senior social worker? It's a responsible job. How will they give you a responsible job if you can't even turn up for the interview on time? What will they think of you if you turn up late for an interview? I'm going, So my arousal levels, my adrenaline levels are pumping up. I didn't know at the time, but you can just do it from Todd to Burnley in about 15 minutes. So I actually pulled into Burnley at 5 to 11, so in my head, I'm already 35 minutes late. You share this, don't you? You can see the look of horror on Tracy's face there. I pull into Burnley. I don't know where I'm going. I've never been to Burnley in my life. I don't know where I'm meant to go to. They didn't have sat-nav in them days. So I dropped my car at a car park. I think I'll just have to ask a passerby and sort of leg it round to the venue. So I park up, ask somebody where Chaddersley House is. They said, oh, it's just round the corner. As luck would have it, I'd parked somewhere very close. They said, just go up the road, turn right, it's on the right-hand side opposite the town hall. Get out of the car. I've got my suit and tie on, because it's interview, you have to do it, don't you? I've got my briefcase, so I look professional. I've got my coat on, because it's lashing down with rain, because it's Burnley, because it generally does. And I run as fast as I can from my car to Chaddersley House. And I need some help, Ruth, because me and exercise we've never been close companions. So when I say run as fast as I can, that's not very fast. And I get to the reception desk at Chaddersley House, and the town hall clock across the way is just beginning to chime 11 as I get to the reception desk. But because I've run, I get there, there's sweat pouring off me. I am puce in the face and I can barely breathe. So I get to the reception desk and I'm going, it's Mr. Grimsby, I've come for a senior social. A woman at the reception desk, she said, oh, Mr. Grimsley, she said, go on straight upstairs. The interviews are running on time. They're waiting for you. And I've never known an interview run on time in the whole of my life. I don't know about anybody else. Never once have I known an interview run on time apart from that time. So I dash upstairs, door open. The guy who was the divisional director opened the door. He said, Mr. Grimsley. He said, come on in, make yourself at home. Take a seat. So I go in, sit down. take my coat off. He said, can we get you a cup of tea? And I've not had a drink since I left Lincoln at 6 o'clock that morning, and I do like tea of a morning. I like a few cups of tea to get me going. So I said, I'd love a cup of tea, that'd be really helpful. He said, well, you just settle yourself, because he could see that my blood pressure were a bit up. He said, you settle yourself, we'll get a cup of tea sorted out before we start the interview. So my adrenaline levels are way high, because I'm doing this, what they're going to think of me turning up hot and sweaty and like that, and I'm late, and blah, 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 blah. I'm doing all this bad stuff in there. He goes and he brings me a cup of tea. And because it's interviews, they're not doing mugs. Because it's an interview, they've brought out the best china. This cup is almost an exact replica. Brook Bond did a set years and years ago where it was some competition and you got these horrible cups and saucers. The only difference is the cup that he gave me, a man couldn't put his finger in the handle, so it were one of them. You know those cups that you... So he brings me this cup and saucer, cup of tea. And one of the things I know is when I get a lot of adrenaline flowing, I get tremor. So it's very common. So he gives me the cup and saucer, and I'm like that. So I feel like I'm playing the cymbals, but not only that, he's filled it to the brim. Absolutely filled to the brim. So I'm like that. And you know what it's like if you become aware of your own shortcomings, you can make them bigger, you can build them up. So he gives me the cup and saucer, I'm rattling it like buggery, there's tea slopping all over the place, but in my head, it's not just a little rattle, it's like I'm playing the cymbals in the Salvation Army band, and it's not just I'm slopping it in my saucer, in my head I'm throwing it all over the panel. So on the inside I'm screaming at myself, I'm saying, Chris, for God's sake, hold your cup and saucer steady, hold your cup and saucer steady. How are they going to give you a responsible job as a senior social worker if you can't even hold a cup and saucer steady? And stop drowning them in tea, please! So my adrenaline levels go even higher. So I'm sitting there like that. And he says, right, Mr. Grimsley, we'll start the interview. He said, first question, he said, tell us what's so good about you. Why should we give you this job? And I didn't know what the question... You know, I said I'd mentally rehearsed the hardest question they could ever ask. I didn't know what it was in my head, but that was it. So they asked me that question, I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing had come out. So I was like... And so on the inside, and you know, it's that magnifying your own shortcomings. So it seemed to me like I was stuck there for 5 minutes like that. I'm sure it was only seconds. And on the inside, I'm screaming at myself. Chris, for God's sake, say something or shut your mouth. Say something or shut your mouth. And the more I do that, the more stressed I get. So then, I know my own stress response very well these days. When I get loads and loads of adrenaline pumping through my body, the final sort of escalation of it is my mouth goes bone dry and my tongue super glues itself to the roof of my mouth. So I finally think of something to say. And it comes out as, well, Mr. Oates, it's like this. I think I've got good communication skills. I'm articulate. I'm committed to the work with people with mental handicaps. And I think I will make a really, really good team leader. And at that point, I thought, I just want to die, you know. This is just, take me out and shoot me stuff. You know, the most curious thing is they gave me the job. I mean, it really makes you wonder what the other candidates were like. If I were the pick of the bunch, God help the others. It's really, really quite odd. Now, the story is slightly exaggerated, only very slightly, for sort of comedy and all of that. But there's a purpose to this, telling you the story. And the purpose is, when you think about it, the reason for me responding and behaving in that way had very, very little to do with the outside world. And it was almost entirely to do with what I was doing on the inside. So it was the pictures, sound, self-talk that I'd imagined that then contributed to a feeling, and then that feeling fed back into that. So there was that interplay of imagined behaviour and emotional response, that going round and round and round. It's that drove my behaviour. So the thing that caused me to behave in that bizarre way was nothing to do with the outside world and everything to do with the inside world. And this was the thing for me when I got this on that NLP taster. I thought, that's what makes us tick. It's not to do with the outside world, it's to do with what you do in here and what you do here. And what NLP is interested in, the heart of NLP is to look at how do people who naturally manage these sorts of things well, what is it that they do that the rest of us that don't? And then how can you share that with other people? So all NLP comes from looking at people who naturally do stuff well, and then it's how do they do what they do that's different to what the rest of us do? So the phrase is looking for the difference that makes the difference, and then how can you share that with other people? And for me, this set me on like the last 15, 17 years of work. Just an absolute fascination with that. So how can we manage our inside world better? Because the truth of the matter is the outside world is often beyond our control. And especially those of you working in and around public services currently, you know, it's trying times. We have no idea what will be happening in public services. I can't control the outside world. What I can control is how I respond to it on the inside, so I can be as resourceful, resilient, upbeat, positive as I can be, and as confident as I can be. And when I do that, I actually handle the outside world much, much better. And that's what NLP promises, that's what NLP gives you, and that's why I'm such a big fan of it. Has that made some sense? Yeah?